Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another deep dive, this time into some breaking news,
Yeah.
unfortunately, out of Northeast Philly.
Yeah, it's Friday night,
It's Friday.
January 31st, 2025.
Oh, man.
And folks are probably thinking about getting ready for their weekend. And then this happens. A medical jet has crashed near Roosevelt Mall.
Oh, wow.
And we are working with live updates and reports from NBC 10 Philadelphia and NBCnews.com to try to piece together what exactly happened here.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot we don't know yet, but we're going to dive in and do our best to figure this out.
Absolutely. And, one thing that's really important to remember in these situations is that this isn't just a news story. There are real people involved. And
Boy.
we know for a fact that there is a young girl who is returning to Mexico after receiving life-saving treatment here in the U.S.
Oh, gosh.
She was on board this flight along with her mother and a medical crew.
Oh, man. That's awful to think about, They must have been so hopeful to finally be going home after all of that.
Absolutely. And, these air ambulances, they play such a crucial role in getting critically ill patients to the care they need sometimes across international borders. So, there's a lot of moving parts involved here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. What do we know about the crash itself? Like, when and where did it happen?
So the plane was a Learjet 55, and it took off from Northeast Philadelphia Airport a little after 6 p.m.,
Okay.
headed to Springfield-Branson National Airport in Missouri with a final stop planned in Tijuana, Mexico.
So a pretty standard route for an air ambulance.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Just 30 seconds after takeoff,
30 seconds.
30 seconds,
Wow.
the plane went down less than 4 miles from the airport.
Something must have gone wrong really fast.
Yeah, and, the eyewitness accounts and some home security footage that's starting to come out are painting a pretty scary picture.
Oh, I bet.
The plane seems to have just plummeted from the sky
Oh, my God.
before crashing into a residential area and erupting into this massive fireball. Several homes caught fire. You can only imagine what that must have been like for the people nearby.
I can't even imagine. What about injuries on the ground or any reported?
Yeah, unfortunately, 6 people were injured and taken to Temple University Hospital. 3 of them are still in fair condition as we speak.
Oh, wow.
And, you have to consider the damage to homes and vehicles in the area. They've got road closures in place, and they've even set up a shelter at Samuel Fells High School for the people who have been displaced by this crash.
So a pretty significant impact on the community as a whole.
For sure.
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps?
Well, I think right now the focus is on 2 main things, the immediate response and the investigation.
Okay.
So you've got first responders on the scene trying to secure the area, make sure everyone's safe, and assess the damage.
Right.
At the same time, you've got the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA,
Right.
and the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB. They're launching their investigations into what caused this crash.
Okay, so 2 separate investigations running concurrently. Can you talk a little bit about what each agency does?
Yeah, absolutely. So the FAA, their main job is regulating and overseeing all aspects of civil aviation here in the U.S.
So they're making sure everybody's following the rules.
Exactly. And the NTSB, they're an independent agency,
Okay.
and they investigate every civil aviation accident in the U.S., plus major accidents involving railroads, highways, marine, and pipelines.
Wow.
Their whole purpose is to figure out what caused the crash and then issue safety recommendations to try to prevent the same thing from happening again.
So they're all about learning from these tragedies and making things safer in the future.
Exactly.
What kinds of things will they be looking at in this particular case?
So they're going to look at everything you can imagine. The aircraft itself, the maintenance records, the pilot's experience and training records, weather conditions at the time of the crash communication logs, anything and everything that might give them some clues as to what happened.
That sounds incredibly thorough.
It has to be. And, this coming just days after that horrible midair collision over the Potomac River really highlights how important these investigations are.
It definitely makes you think about the risks involved with flying.
Absolutely. Every one of these incidents underscores that and reminds us about how vital these agencies are in making sure air travel is as safe as it can be.
So we've got a lot of questions still, like what caused this Learjet to go down so soon after takeoff?
Right.
Were there any specific conditions that might have led to this?
Those are the big questions right now. Was it a mechanical failure, pilot error, some sudden unexpected weather event, or maybe a combination of factors?
It's hard to say at this point, but I'm sure we'll get more information as the investigations progress.
Yeah.
In the meantime, our thoughts go out to the victims, their families, and everyone who's been affected by this horrible event.
Absolutely. This isn't just some abstract news story. There are real people suffering tonight, and we need to keep that in mind as we try to piece together what happened. So while we wait for those answers, I think it's worth taking a closer look at the aircraft itself, the Learjet 55.
Okay.
It's generally considered a high-performance jet and pretty reliable, but, it's got a history.
Oh, really? What kind of history are we talking about?
Well, over the years, there have been a number of incidents and accidents involving this particular model.
Yeah.
Some of them involved mechanical issues, others were attributed to pilot error or bad weather
So
conditions.
not a perfect track record.
Right. And, it's too early to say anything about the maintenance history of this specific plane,
Yeah.
but that will definitely be a key focus for the NTSB investigators.
Makes sense. They'll be looking for anything that could have been a red flag, any patterns of problems, things like that.
Exactly. And speaking of potential factors, you mentioned pilot error earlier.
Right.
So the investigation is going to look very closely at the pilot's experience and qualifications.
So things like training records, flight hours,
Mm.
any previous incidents.
All of that and their overall experience flying this type of aircraft.
So it's a really deep dive into every aspect of the flight.
It has to be they want to leave no stone unturned,
And of course, we can't forget about the weather.
right?
We heard reports of light rain, fog, and strong winds.
Yeah, those conditions could definitely have played a role. Learjets, like all planes have limitations when it comes to flying in bad weather.
Right.
So the investigators will be trying to determine if the weather at the time of the crash exceeded those limitations or if it might have influenced the pilot's decisions.
I imagine they'll also be looking into the communication between the pilot and air traffic control in those final moments.
Absolutely, those communication logs are crucial. They're like another black box.
How so?
Well, they can reveal a lot about what was going on in the cockpit, the pilot's state of mind, any concerns they might have had, any instructions they received from air traffic control.
It's almost like you can use those different pieces of information to reconstruct what happened in those last few minutes.
It really is like detective work.
It is.
Every piece of evidence, from the wreckage itself to the weather data to the communication logs, helps paint a clearer picture of the events.
And this crash, in particular, really highlights the human cost of these accidents.
Mm.
We're talking about a young girl who had just received life-saving treatment. She was on her way home, full of hope.
It's just
It
heartbreaking.
really is.
Whoa.
And it underscores the fact that these air ambulances, while they provide a vital service, they're not without risk.
You're absolutely right.
We mentioned earlier that the girl was a patient at Shriners Children's Hospital.
You're right.
They've confirmed that she and her mother were on board the flight.
And, Shriners hospitals, they do amazing work with children who have complex medical conditions, and they often provide treatment regardless of the family's ability to pay.
That makes this story even more tragic.
Yeah.
This girl and her family had already overcome so much only to face this horrible accident.
And we can't forget about the medical crew on board either. They dedicated their lives to caring for others. They put themselves at risk to transport patients in need.
Absolutely. Their sacrifice and commitment deserve to be recognized. It's a stark reminder of the dangers they face every time they fly.
And it's also a reminder of how important it is to constantly look for ways to improve safety in air ambulance operations.
So what are some of the specific things that could be done to make these flights safer?
Well, one area that's often discussed is pilot training and qualifications.
Okay.
Making sure that pilots who fly air ambulances have extensive experience, specialized training in handling medical emergencies and rigorous ongoing training, things that go above and beyond the standard requirements.
So really raising the bar for these pilots.
Exactly. Another area that often comes up is aircraft maintenance.
Right, making sure the planes are in top condition.
Right.
But isn't there already a pretty strict system in place for that?
There is, but there's always room for improvement. Some experts believe that we need even stricter maintenance requirements for air ambulances, given how critical their missions are.
I could see that.
And then, of course, you have technological advancements.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Things like advanced weather detection systems, real-time flight data monitoring, enhanced cockpit warning systems. These are constantly evolving, and they could play a huge role in preventing accidents in the future.
So it's a combination of human, mechanical, and technological factors that all contribute to air ambulance safety.
Exactly. It's a complex system, and we need to see improvements across the board to make these life-saving flights as safe as possible.
That makes sense. And while we wait for the investigations to run their course, I think it's important to acknowledge the work of all the people who put their lives on the line every day to help others.
Absolutely.
From the pilots and medical crews to the first responders who are out there right now at the crash site.
I couldn't agree more. Their courage and dedication are truly remarkable.
As we wrap up our deep dive here, I think we should shift gears and focus on the investigation itself. You talked about the NTSB meticulously examining the wreckage, analyzing the flight data recorder, talking to witnesses. Can you walk us through that a little bit? What exactly are they looking for?
Oh, absolutely. The NTSB investigation is incredibly thorough. I mean, think of it like a giant puzzle. They're trying to piece together exactly what happened by analyzing every single detail.
Okay.
So when they examine the wreckage, they're not just looking at the big pieces, they're looking at every bolt, every wire, every single component,
Wow.
trying to see if there's any indication of a malfunction or a failure that could have caused the crash.
So they're looking for clues on a really tiny scale.
Okay.
What about the flight data recorder you mentioned? It's like a black box. What kind of information does it actually record?
The flight data recorder captures a ton of information about how the plane was performing during the flight.
Okay.
Things like altitude, airspeed, heading, engine parameters, control inputs from the pilot, even things like cabin pressure and temperature.
So it's like having a detailed record of everything that happened to the plane leading up to the crash.
Exactly. It's like a time machine almost. You can go back and reconstruct those critical moments.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How do they actually use that data to figure out what happened?
Well, the NTSB has a whole team of specialists who can analyze this data, and they use really sophisticated software to basically recreate the flight path, the plane's movements, the pilot's actions, and by comparing that data to the wreckage analysis witness accounts and all the other pieces of the puzzle, they can start to form a hypothesis about what went wrong.
So it's a very technical process.
Yeah.
How long does a typical NTSB investigation take?
It really varies depending on how complex the accident is.
Right.
It's not a quick process, though. It usually takes several months, sometimes even a year or more, to really complete a thorough investigation, analyze all the data, and then issue a final report.
And what's the purpose of that final report? Is it just to figure out who to blame, or is there more to it than that?
The NTSB's main goal isn't really about assigning blame. It's about understanding what happened and why it happened, so they can make recommendations to prevent similar accidents from happening in the future.
Okay.
Their reports usually include a really detailed analysis of the probable cause of the accident contributing factors and a list of safety recommendations that are aimed at improving aviation safety across the board.
So it's all about learning from these tragedies and making flying safer for everyone.
Exactly. And it's not just about preventing those big catastrophic accidents like this one.
Right.
The NTSB also investigates smaller incidents, near misses, things like that, because even those can give them valuable insights into potential safety issues.
So it's a process of continuous improvement, always trying to make aviation safer.
Exactly. And it's really a collaborative effort, too.
How so?
Well, the NTSB works with airlines, manufacturers, pilots associations, all sorts of stakeholders to make sure those safety recommendations are implemented and to create this overall culture of safety throughout the industry.
It's really amazing how seriously they take aviation safety and how much work goes on behind the scenes to prevent these kinds of tragedies.
Yeah, it's really impressive, and I think it's important for us as passengers and as, members of the public to be aware of these efforts and to support organizations like the NTSB that are working so hard to keep us safe.
Absolutely. So as we wait for more answers in this particular case, it's comforting to know that there are these dedicated professionals who are trying to understand what happened and try to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Definitely. And in the meantime, I think we can all take a moment to honor the victims, their families, and everyone affected by this crash by continuing to ask questions, push for transparency and accountability when it comes to aviation safety, and just support the efforts to make flying safer for everyone.
Well said. And here at DRM News, we will definitely continue to follow this story closely and will provide updates as they become available. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into this breaking news event. We'll be back soon with more in-depth coverage of the stories that matter.